Welcome to episode 29 of Exit Philosophy, season 2. And we have a co-host in the seat today. It's Dave Perkins, who we have a long history going back to the early 90s. Scotty Mack is away. He's whale watching in Newfoundland, which probably is more entertaining than what we saw at Rogers Center in the last little while with the Jays. But in terms of Dave Perkins and why he's here, he's the guy who hired me. He hired me onto the Star. Dave Perkins was replacing himself. He was the top, one of the top baseball columnists in North America, working for the 7th largest newspaper at the time in North America. And he was becoming sports editor and needed to hire someone to replace himself. And to this day, I don't know why he would take a journalism virgin and bring him in to replace himself, maybe to make himself look good. What were the reasons, Dave?
I just, what can I say? 30 odd years later, it's, I guess it was just a litany of mistakes. Like I never should have become sports editor. That's for sure. And then I guess I had to think outside the box. So whatever, that was a big phrase in those days. But anyway, I thought you knew something about baseball and you could write a little bit. So I guess the pool wasn't real deep. I don't know. I know your wife never forgave me. So
to this day,
exactly. So
I
anyway.
recommended, you called me and I recommended Michael Farber. I thought for sure he would be the one.
Yeah.
He didn't want to
go? I don't remember. There were a couple of guys that did want the job, but I don't think Farber's wanted one. I think Sports Illustrated, I don't think he wanted the daily grind. He was doing great with SI and, Farber's as good as it gets, right? But
yeah, he's my favorite ever.
Yeah. Well, yeah, next to us, of course.
Yeah, next to us, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Speaking of which, you just mentioned earlier about sort of becoming the sports editor at the Star, and then I could see that you really still wanted to write, and part of that is we just finished watching the Open at Royal Troon.
Yeah.
Part of your gig was you didn't just cover baseball, and as we all did under your watch, we were allowed to cover other events, but you made sure that you had the British Open and the Masters and other big events.
Yeah.
Royal Troon, you got any memories of Royal Troon?
I have many memories of Royal Troon. That you can see behind me, those are all my British Open armbands. I did 17 British Opens, Open Championship.
I
covered 58 golf majors, 17 Opens and a bunch of US Opens and a bunch of Masters and PGAs and Ryder Cups and President's Cup. But my first Open was at 1997 in Royal Troon, and I covered a couple Opens at Troon, and I liked the place. It was Royal Troon was it's on the west coast of Scotland, and you'd love it there because there's like 5 or 6 links golf courses within about 12 miles, and Troon is one of them, and Prestwick and Dundonald and Western Gales, all these tremendous golf courses. And in 2004, when I was covering at Royal Troon, on the Tuesday of Open Week, they opened a brand new course called Dundonald, a links course about 5-6 miles from Royal Troon. So, of course, sports writers' favorite price for golf was free, and so we go up to play golf, and it is just pissing rain all day. It was like Saturday at Troon here the other day. And I mean, it's just hideous rain. And we go out and play, and everybody's like, So I finished 18 holes, and I'm completely drenched. And I go into the men's room, and they got one of those little electric hand dryers, So I'm trying to wring myself out and get dry, and it's just. And there happens to be 3 stalls. So I go to the left-hand urinal. I'm taking a leak. And in comes Gary Player, whom I knew, with Prince Andrew, the Queen's son, the pervert son.
Oh, yeah.
So in they come and sidle up to the next 2 urinals. And Gary Player looks at me and says, "Oh, David, how nice to see you," and blah, blah, blah. And did you like the course and all the usual stuff, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just, I say, "Oh, isn't that great, Gary? It's wonderful. We're all soaking wet," and blah, blah, blah. And he says, "So we're kind of finishing." And he says, "Well, David, let me present His Royal Highness Prince Andrew." And I said, "This probably isn't a place to shake hands. It's one thing." And then he's looking at me like I got six heads and everything. And I said, "I got a picture of your mother in my wallet," meaning like a $20 bill, right? And of course, now he's really looking at me. And then he goes, "Oh, you're Canadian," blah, 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 and we talk. So anyway, that was my run-in with the prince. So 2 days later, that they're playing. And in those days, we didn't have cell phones, and you certainly didn't have cell phones across the Atlantic. So I'm in the back of the press room, and there's a bank of telephones, and I'm calling my wife, who she's very much in tune with the royal family, and she's a fan of that, blah, 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 and I don't know them really. I don't follow it, but I'm sitting there and I'm on the bank of international payphones, sitting at the back of the press room talking to my wife. And in comes a couple of security goons, and behind them is Prince Andrew again. Second time I met. And he kind of stops and looks at me. And I say, talking on the phone, "Hey, Prince, how are you today?" Or something ridiculous. And he goes, "Oh," he waves and cheerio, and off he goes. And my wife says, "Who is that?" And I said, "Well, that's Prince Andrew, the Queen's son." We didn't know he was the
You're right.
pervert. Yeah. That's my pal, Prince Andrew, the Queen's son. And my wife's going, "Yeah, sure it is. Yeah, right. Yeah, blah, blah, blah." But it actually was. That was, and of course, years later, when you find out what the guy was all about, you're kind of going,
Well, you're glad you didn't shake his hand at that point.
Exactly, especially in the men's room.
I got one of my favorite golf stories of you covering was when you won the draw at the Masters, and then you talked about the putt that you had from the top of that par five. Could you talk about that one just a little bit?
I won the lottery twice, and the first time I had no idea what I was doing, and I was behind 18, and I'm the one you're talking about is at 5, and I'm in front of 5 and 2 shots, and I pull out my little chipper, and I'm going to chip this thing, and I chip what I think is a chip, and the caddy goes, "Oh, geez," and he immediately he grabs a 9-iron and he's thrusting it to me as the ball's on the green. I'm going, "What's going on here?" And it went and off the back of the green and into the bunker, blah, blah, blah. And I did the same thing at 18. I was over the green. So I tried to chip down, and very, very delicately. And the caddy goes, "Oh," and he's like that. And he's handing me a sand iron because, of course, down the green, down the second, into the bunker, like it's that's the thing about Augusta the first time. Like, I had no clue what the greens were like. It was second time I played pretty well there. I made 5 pars in a row, and didn't have a 3-putt because I had a great caddy that time. Second time.
I first met you when the Jays were really good back in the early 90s, and you had been there for a few years.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the difference between what you see of the media then as part of the fabric of what was going on, and the reliance that fan base had on you guys to learn what was going on compared to what you see now?
Well, I mean, I think it was completely different because we traveled with the team. We would never miss a game, and usually there was a reporter and a columnist at most of those games. We had access. We stayed in the same hotels. You go down for breakfast and you'd see a guy, and if you were getting along with him, you could sit down and have breakfast with him, or lunch or whatever. You ride the buses with these guys. They get to know you as a person rather than just an adversarial guy. You know what I mean? You could joke with them. and every time you were with them, it wasn't necessarily, I need something from this guy. You know what I mean? You could pass the time of days. You could tell them jokes. You could talk about their wives and kids. You know what I mean? Because everybody had, wives and kids and lives away from the ballpark. You got to know these guys different than just a bunch of numbers, which to me it is now. There's no access, or very little access, and everything is based on numbers. And it's just, to me, it's as boring as doing your taxes when I read baseball numbers about exit velocities and all this crap. It doesn't interest me at all, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and to me, the fact of social media and players going out and fearing that they'll be captured on somebody's cell phone and sent out on Instagram or wherever, I think that has changed a lot. Plus the disparity in salaries between the people covering and the people playing the game. I mean, I sort of bridged that gap, and
Right.
I was there at the tail end of what you're talking about. And for the most part, the new generation, that there's no interaction, there's no access. Used to be that going on the road would be the great access because the clubhouse would be open
Absolutely.
for 2 hours, and there's fewer local journalists there, and you could just sit down anytime and get your story, and then
Exactly.
yeah, that was great. Now it's not this, 50 minutes of access is what you get. And in the new clubhouse, there's so many places that players can go, and I really see sort of almost an NFL or a football atmosphere where pitchers no longer know hitters, hitters don't know pitchers. They're so compartmentalized in terms of what they do because there's so many different places in the clubhouse to go. I mean, you can talk about going in and guys are playing cards and other guys are
Absolutely.
whatever.
Or there was golfers, I like, there was a lot of guys played golf. There would be, golf bags on the road trips regularly, and not just the writer. They didn't care if the writers brought golf bags, because somebody had to play with Tom Cheek, and Tom was playing every day, on the road. And I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but he's passed. Jimmy Williams had a rule against players playing golf on the road, but he didn't care if the broadcasters did and the writers did and the equipment guys did. Jeff Ross would play all the time. So after a couple of these trips, a couple of players, and I won't name them, but a couple of players came to me and said, "Do you have any extra bag tags?" I said, "Sure." Yeah. And they said, "Well, we want to borrow your bag tags so we can take our clubs on the trip, and we'll put your bag tag on. So if Jimmy Williams ever finds it, it's your clubs, it's not our club." I said, "No problem." So I'm passing out bag tags, like, you know what I'm saying? And I said, "Well, if Jimmy ever looks, he'll wonder why I got 4 bags on this trip, 4 bags of clubs." But I mean, that's the way it was. You could do something like that for a guy. It didn't mean he owed you anything. It's just the way it was,
Before we get into this discussion on this year's Blue Jays and the trade deadline approaching, you just came back from a road trip, a baseball road trip, an annual thing that you do with your son,
Yep.
Al. Can you talk about that and the difference? Let's talk about, after you describe your trip, let's talk about the differences between the fan base, the traveling fan base then and now. Because I bridged that gap, and we can talk about that. But talk about your trip with Al.
Well, the recent one, we try to pick off stadiums rather than teams. Like, we don't care if we see a game's a game, we like to see stadiums. Like, I'm up to 53 major league stadiums.
Wow.
And I imagine you got a lot too.
I'm at 39.
Like, I go back to the Polo Grounds. I was in the Polo Grounds in '62. You know what I mean? Like, as a kid. But so I hadn't been to a Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. So, a year ago we did the Texas 2-step, Texas and Houston. And the year before that we did St. Louis and Kansas City. And the year before that we did Milwaukee, Minnesota kind of deal. So we're picking off the stadiums left and right, the ones that I never got to, you know what I mean? Like, because I haven't traveled with the ball team for almost 30 years. Occasionally I'd go to things, but so anyway, so a year ago we were looking at that Cincinnati team. You say De La Cruz and Encarnacion Strand and India and all these young guys. They're an exciting team, blah blah blah. So, well, let's do Cincinnati, and we'll just stop off at Pittsburgh on the way and hope we can see Skeens. We'll try to fit that in, but we didn't. But so we went to Cincinnati for a couple of games, and they were playing the Tigers, and they're leading like 6-0 or 5-0, and the Reds bring in 2 relievers in a row, each of whom gives up 3 hits or walks and 3 runs. So two relievers into the 8th inning, it's now 6-5 Tigers. Tigers win the game, and both relievers walk off to complete silence. Nobody's booing, nobody's throwing stuff, nobody's yelling, "You cost me my bet," like you hear now. Like I'm saying, are these people, like, are they involved in this game? I mean, I was a little stunned by that because, most fan bases would be not happy with relievers coming in and going 6 for 6 and 6 runs.
We saw that the other day at Rogers Center. Not happy with that team, the way that they ended that game.
But anyway, the highlight of course, watching De La Cruz, it was fantastic to watch, was in the 2 games he went 0 for 8 with 6 strikeouts. I think, or 5 strikeouts. So perfect time. But then we go to Pittsburgh. You'll like this one. So we're in Pittsburgh, and we're not seeing Skeens, but I love that Pittsburgh stadium. I'd say top 3 for sure. That stadium, it's just great. So it's 90 degrees, and the sun is banging down. It's an afternoon game, and we're sitting down behind third base, down 15 rows up or whatever. We're just having a nice day, and it is so hot. I'm going to turn into a grease spot. You know what I mean? Like, it's just brutal. So after like an inning, I said, let's move back 20 rows, sit under the overhang. It's nice and shady. Still a good seat. We don't care. We'll just, back we go, sit there, have a beer, watch the ball game, blah, blah, blah. So and everybody in the section is kind of clustered up under the overhang. Here we are, where everybody's packed in, basically, those half a dozen shady rows, and the next 20 rows, there aren't 30 people. I don't know, like, braving it out. But in comes 2 people, 2 guys, both of them wearing City Connect shirts. One's a City Connect George Springer, and one's a City Connect Guerrero, right down, sit in the sun. And we're looking at this, and we're sitting there saying, not only are these guys wearing Blue Jays City Connect shirts to a Mets Pirates game, they're wearing black shirts, and it's 90-odd degrees, and it's ridiculous. Why are you wearing black shirts out in anyway, that was just, we were kind of laughing about this, saying, I bet these guys collapsed within a few innings. Like, we couldn't figure it out, but it made me laugh of it, like this whole City Connect thing. Like, I said, this is kind of the offshoot of Toronto Maple Leaf fans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how much the team embarrasses you, you're going to buy all the garbage. You're going to buy the shirts. You're going to buy the lottery tickets. You're going to buy, you know what I mean? Like Keith Pelly comes in and he says about the Leafs, "Oh, well, we're not here to sell shirts." Well, no, actually, they are here to sell shirts, because that's what they do. They have a different third jersey, and we're going to sell all this stuff, because we can't sell a hat with a Stanley Cup on it, apparently, because that says 67. Like, this is, I see this with the Jays. I see people buying all this merchandise and everything for a team that, as far as I can tell, they're extremely angry at. I don't get it.
I think that baseball, more than any other sport, promotes exactly what you're talking about: road trips, father-son, father-daughter, mother-son. Yeah. I think baseball, because you get basically 3 days in a city. You can unpack your bag, you can stay in a hotel, you can see the city. In hockey and football or whatever, it's one night. Yeah. One night you go. And I remember my daughter Kelly was 19, and she wasn't a big baseball fan. And she accused me of favoring the 2 boys, because I coached them, and we had
Sure.
common. And so she's giving me hell just as I was getting ready to drive to Pittsburgh for the All-Star game, and I might have been 06, around that time. And I said, "You want to go?" Because I had a hotel room and I was driving. It didn't matter. She said, "Can I bring my friend?" So Alyssa came along with us. And it was that road trip, that 3 days in Pittsburgh, where she called me on deadline. Sorry about that if you're editing at the Star at the time, but I don't think on
Nah.
deadline. And from the top of the stadium where I got her the worst seat in the house for the All-Star game. And I think Trevor Hoffman had just given up a reverse ninth inning hit. And I'm on deadline and I'm writing, and I answered the phone and she goes, "Dad, I love baseball." And all of a sudden it was all worthwhile, it was all worthwhile.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
Sure.
fan base, well, I said we would talk about the fan base and the changing fan base. My opinion is that when I got there in the mid 90s, it was an older fan base. Baseball was worried that the fans were getting too old and the game wasn't replacing it with younger fans. And you would see that on the road because they would wait outside. It would be an older fan base waiting outside a hotel for autographs. And then when the players were all in, they'd go back to their room and whatever. And now, probably since the early 10s, I see younger, entrepreneurial, 30-something Blue Jays fans. And you see it in Seattle when they're there, the place is just crawling with them. And they don't go back to the hotel and wait for autographs. They go out and party. They have a good time, and that's
Right. Yeah.
for the economy of the city. But do you see enough of a change that
Yeah.
the game doesn't have to worry about a younger fan base anymore?
Well, I mean, we've been hearing this about baseball for the 60 odd years I've been going to games, right? That it was always an older fan base and everything. I think what happened in Toronto was, like, take it up to 92, 93 when they were winning World Series, and they were good every year. Look how the city has changed from then till now. You have about 500,000 people living in condos, right? That weren't there in 1992, 93. You got people who can walk to the ball game, hundreds of thousands of people who live in that condo forest downtown who can basically walk to the ball game. That, I'm guessing, is a younger crowd than all us old guys who live in the suburbs. You know what I mean? Yeah. And a lot of us old guys who live in the suburbs, we're not going to games now because it's an absolute nightmare to try to drive downtown and park anywhere. Right? I think that their marketing, I mean, look at their marketing now. It's come buy lottery tickets, come buy $1 hot dogs. Like it looks like they're marketing to crackheads sometimes. Yeah. You know what I mean? With some of the
promotion of gambling is something that's shocking.
Well, exactly, and that's the new normal. You know what I mean? Like it's all normal, and it's when you watch a telecast now, it's like watching the shopping channel, as someone says. They're selling, $1 hot dogs, and they're selling lottery tickets. What do they call it? The 50-50 and all that. And come down next week and we'll give you a potato chip plate or whatever the hell that thing was. A salsa plate or whatever. And
that plate, yeah.
Come back next week and we're gonna have a cowboy music guy in. Like, it's all like, nothing is tied to baseball. Absolutely nothing is tied to baseball. It's tied to event.
Yeah,
and I think that's the biggest difference.
But is it good for the future of the game, do you think, or is it just another entertainment outlet for people with money?
Right? They're clearly marketing to the moneyed crowd who can afford the $15 or $18 beers or whatever and don't mind spending that. And I mean, these are the people who spend thousands of dollars on the Taylor Swift tickets, I'm guessing, because it's the place to be. But I think once you got a last place team, well, this is a last place team, but once it's a really, unpopular last place team like this one, I can see people saying, well, that isn't the cool place to be anymore. Now, right, for the last couple of years, I guess it's the cool place to be. But
Yeah.
I don't think it will be very long.
Yeah, and that's why, to me, that's why they can never go to a total rebuild like the Orioles did and the Astros did by losing 100 games 3 out of 5 years and then building
Yep.
through the draft, because they just put 300, 400 million into the stadium. And so you can't sell a 100-loss team and say, hey, be patient, because ownership is not going to be patient with Mark Shapiro about the money he spent and then not put a competitive team on the field to leave that place empty.
Well, I don't know about that. Ownership seems to not care. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen the owner come out and say one word. I mean, you know, and I know, Rich, you went through it in Montreal. The most important player on any team is the owner. If the owner wants to win, that's what he's going to make sure to. I mean, love him or hate him, George Steinbrenner built not only the Yankees, he built the American League into the league that wins the All-Star game every year and wins the head-to-head every year.
To use the old cliche about George Steinbrenner, I think he hated to lose more than he loved to win.
Yeah, exactly. And it was simple with George. If you didn't win, we're going to get you rid of you and find somebody who can win. And he kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And the funny thing is, he won, right? 3 years after he bought the team, they were in the World Series. And 4 years after he bought the team, they won the World Series. And he won. And then he bought the television channel and the soccer team and all the other stuff that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They MLSD did it backwards. You know, they bought the soccer team and the basketball team and the condos and the restaurants and everything and the TV channel, but they didn't win.
Before we're having good discussions on other things than this current group of Blue Jays, which probably is an intelligent way to go. But you talk, is George Steinbrenner in the Hall of Fame? I don't.
No. I think he should be.
Of course,
I don't. Yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, not everybody in Cooperstown was a wonderful citizen who didn't go to jail. You know.
Yeah, there's plenty of assholes at Cooperstown, and
sure.
And even if, no matter what you think of George Steinbrenner, that might be the worst opinion that you have.
Right.
Which means that he qualifies. But Sunday was the Hall of Fame ceremony with Joe Mauer, Todd Helton, Adrian Beltre, and Jim Leyland. We've been voters for a long time. I don't know if you still vote, but
no, I lost it this year. This is the first year I did not vote because you're only allowed to vote for 10 years after you retire, and I've been retired 11 years.
Do you have any stories or memories of Mauer, Helton, Beltre, or Leyland? I got a good one of Leyland, but have you got?
Well, I mean, I liked Leyland. Leyland was a great guy. I mean, you know, in the old days, the writers, we'd go into the manager's office and sit down, and you just bullshit with them. You just go back and forth. And, you know, who's hurt today and who's this and why is this guy batting seventh and the usual stuff. And he'd crack a joke and
have a smoke.
Leyland was, you know what I mean? Leyland would light up a cigarette and he'd start blithering away. And you get into different topics. I mean, it was like Sparky Anderson. Sparky was the greatest because Sparky would do everything but take your notes for you. You know what I mean? Sparky would, what do you want to talk about? What do you know, and Sparky had, you know, if you said, well, what about this kid over here? And Sparky would compare him to Honus Wagner. You know what I mean? But I mean, Sparky just loved to talk and Leyland was very much like that. He was old school. He's like, of all your Blue Jay managers, I think he was the most with Fregosi, right? Fregosi was an old time guy.
Yeah.
Loved to sit there, loved to shoot the bull. You know, just carry on, tell stories, like the good story. I mean, he understood that they play every day. Every day isn't heart surgery. You know what I mean?
My Leyland memory is the fact that Dave Dombrowski, when he was general manager in Montreal, he just loved Jim Leyland. They started together with the White Sox, and Leyland was a base coach.
Sure.
So he loved the hands-on concern that Leyland had for all of his players. And he was always looking to hire Jim Leyland as his next manager. And
Right.
it didn't happen in Montreal. And so he
Got
ended
him
up
in
with a succession.
Detroit.
Yeah, so he ended up with a succession of people. But when Leyland was still with the Pirates and we were in St. Louis, the Expos were in St. Louis, and you remember Moises Alou had that Joe Theismann injury to his ankle.
Oh, he snapped it. Yeah. Gruesome. Yeah.
And his foot is lying sideways on the field. I went down from the press box as a PR guy just to check out what was going on, and it was jarring to see Felipe Alou with his foot on the top step of the dugout, not even look at his son being wheeled off on a gurney.
Yeah.
Because the game was still going on and Felipe was focused on that, and a man is a man, and he can, my son can take care of himself. So we were traveling back to Montreal after that game. It was the last game of the series. So we go there and Moises stays in hospital in St. Louis. Pirates were the next team in, and Jim Leyland went from the airport to the hospital to visit Moises Alou because he was his first manager.
Wow.
And he was a Pirates prospect. So he went directly to the hospital. Meanwhile, Moises' dad, and I love Felipe, is one of my 5 favorite men of all time. He flew with the team back to Montreal. And so that was 90. So when Moises got back to Montreal, he asked me to compose a telegram of thanks to Jim Leyland, and he gave me some wording. So I did that. So I always remember that. And then 4 years later, when Moises was a free agent and Jim Leyland was in Florida, I am sure he signed with the Marlins partly because of the concern and the personal concern that Jim Leyland had for him when he was in hospital. And then they won the World Series.
Yeah.
So, this is what a Hall of Fame baseball person is all about.
That's a great story, and I mean, let's not forget, this guy had Barry Bonds when Bonds was the best player in baseball all around, when he was the best left fielder anybody had seen in years, and a slugger, and, in Pittsburgh and everything before he went, out to the Giants and became what he became. But Barry was a handful. Everybody knows it. All the Pittsburgh writers used to talk about what a handful he was, and his teammates would talk about it. Leyland kind of kept him on the straight and narrow there. Leyland kept him.
He was a 5-tool a-hole in Pittsburgh. And then
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the Star was pretty good in those days. In 87, remember when Eric Davis was so hot? Eric Davis was
one of my favorite all-time players in terms of
talent. He was the Ellie De La Cruz of his time. He could do anything on a ball field. And the Star flew me to Cincinnati to sit down and do a one-on-one with Eric Davis, which was fine, a nice feature. He couldn't have been better. He was great. Talked to all kinds of guys, you know what I mean? Like it was a good piece to do. Well, when Bonds was crazy, they flew me to Pittsburgh to do the same thing. And as you know, you clear it with the PR guy who clears it with the player before you get in the airplane. Right? Because you're not going to fly all the way down there and the guy blows you off. Well, the Pittsburgh PR guy had run it past Bonds. Bonds said, yeah, Toronto guy, I'll talk to him, blah, 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 blah. Well, I got down there for 3 days. He blew me off every time. Yeah. He'd come and sit beside me while I was talking to somebody else and say, you want to talk now, right? I said, sure, whenever you're ready. He'd go, not now. And he'd get up and run away. Like he was playing games like that. You know what I mean? So you end up writing a feature with maybe 3 quotes you steal from Bonds when he's talking to some, you know what I mean? Like he never did a sit down with the guy. Like it was just a waste of time and money.
I did a Manny Ramirez feature in Cleveland, and luckily the Jays were playing there, but it was a young Manny Ramirez when he was probably in his second year, and I went through the PR, and I had set up the interview, and then he comes back at the last minute, and he says, Manny is not comfortable talking in English. And I went, oh, okay. And then I looked at his biography, and he went to high school in Manhattan. That's still possible.
Some days I'm not comfortable talking in English either. So, you know how it works.
All right. Well, inevitably we had to get around to talking about this year's Blue Jays. And to steal from The Sound of Music, what do you do with a problem like Kikuchi?
I mean, you trade him.
He's the one guy with value that is likely to go at the trade deadline, and he's on an expiring contract. What would you do with him? Not just him, but others.
I'd trade them all. I would absolutely trade all of them. I guess you can't trade Bichette now because he's broke again, but I would trade anyone. I would trade Guerrero. I'd say back up the truck and get 4 prospects. You know what I mean? Look what Washington did by getting rid of Soto, I should say. They just loaded up on these guys. If you can find somebody who will do it, do it. But in the meantime, Kikuchi, absolutely. He's a free agent. You can buy him back, you know. It's like the Yankees did with Chapman that year, right? They got Gleyber Torres from, pardon the expression, Gleyber Torres. He's turned into like a huge Saint Bernard of a dog this year. But I mean, you can always sign the guy back. You could maybe sign back Jansen if you know, because they sure aren't going to keep Jansen and qualify him to get a draft pick for him.
Nobody's going to qualify him. Even if he goes somewhere else, they're not going to qualify
exactly him. So he's going to be a free agent. You can always sign them back if Kikuchi likes it as much as he says.
Kikuchi's borderline qualifying offer. There's some dumb teams out there that might do it just so they get a compensation in return.
Right.
But he might take that offer, you know, like he might go,
he might.
1 year, $21 million. But the problem that I see, Dave, is that the great circle of baseball life is that you get veteran players being pushed from beneath in your farm system. Somebody needs to play, so you trade him for young prospects who go to the bottom of the totem pole and then work their way up, and they push that guy out. So that's a great circle. But the Jays have a broken circle because nobody in the minor leagues is pushing. There's nobody who's saying, "Hey, look at me, I got to play." Nobody. And if you trade Kikuchi, and then some are even suggesting Bassett, if you trade 2 out of the 4 healthy guys, and who knows about Yariel Rodriguez, they've got him on an innings limit. Right. Then who pitches? And the last 65 games become a total disaster. And then how do you build for next year? How do you convince any player to come here if they've lost 100 games?
Well, you overpay them. That's how you do it. You know that you overpay them, and you can offer playing time and overpay. So, I mean, that's the way to do it. But I mean, is Kikuchi really worth all that much? Like, he's good. He throws hard. He's a 4 or 5 inning pitcher right now, apparently, which apparently is what Rodriguez is.
If you have Kikuchi as a contender on your team in August and September, you get 10 or 11 starts because they've cleverly set it up so that his turn is the 31st of July. That's not a mistake. They can dangle that and say, hey, you can use him right away on the 31st because
absolutely
we've got it set. So 11 starts, let's say, that he's got remaining. Any contender could have him as a 3rd or 4th starter in their rotation for 2
absolutely
years. And that means if you're a 3rd or 4th starter, you're a valuable piece of a postseason roster. And that's why it's worth a team acquiring him, even if you don't think that long term he's going to be that great. He's a free agent at the end of the year. You just wash your hands and let him go. So he's easily the most valuable commodity they had. What are you going to do with Danny Jansen, who needs 2 weeks, 3 weeks to learn his new pitching staff, and by that time you're all ready for August, you know?
Yeah, you seldom see catchers switching. I mean, the Kikuchi thing is, like, to me, I'm going back a long way. Doyle Alexander for John Smoltz, right?
Yeah.
Got the Tigers into the postseason that year. You know what I mean? And Smoltz became a Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer. But the Tigers got a shot. They took their shot.
Who knows about Dalton Varsho for Lourdes and Moreno? They got to the World Series. It's a similar type situation you're talking about, but will they ever get back? They only won 84 games last year.
Exactly. They were a fluke team, and you know, it as much as I understand, Varsho he's never going to hit for a high average. He's the best defensive outfielder they've had since Devon White, in my opinion. He's the smartest player in the team. He and kind of Falefa are the only smart guys, real smart guys in the team. Varsho does get big hits. You know what I mean? In a way that the three guys at the top of the order who drove them straight into last place by never getting big hits did early in the year. I mean, Gurriel, forget him. He was just a defensive liability who was going to make way too much money. And
he won a Gold Glove.
He was a defensive liability.
No. Yeah, he did win a Gold Glove. And
no, he didn't. He didn't.
He was a finalist. He was a
finalist because of the stupid numbers. He's in the deciding game of the World Series last year. He gave up a triple down the left field line to the go-ahead run. Like, I mean, he just forget Gurriel. He wasn't. He's just a guy. And you say Marino. Okay, well, Marino's, he's good. Catching wasn't a problem last year. Jansen had more big hits than anybody in the team, and Kirk was a Gold Glove finalist. So catching was not their problem. So which of those guys was not going to play or be around for Marino? Like you can
and the miscalculation,
go back and parse trades, but
miscalculation in that trade, or one of the miscalculations, was that they needed a guy like Varsho who could also catch. He had 33 games catching Diamondbacks.
Yeah.
So, well, if we're going to have Alejandro Kirk do some DHing, then we need a second catcher on the bench available, and that would be Varsho, because aren't we we figured this out, and he can catch, and then it turns out that Kirk's bat sucked, and they never used him as a DH, and it was straight up Varsho, the outfielder, for those two guys, and that didn't work out.
Right, exactly. And if let's pretend for a second that they were ever in the game on Ohtani, he'd have been the DH, not Kirk. So once again, it's you kind of wonder. And as soon as he left, they hired Turner. So clearly, Kirk was never going to be the DH.
In terms of bullpen guys like Jimmy Garcia or Trevor Richards, who seems to have reached his best before date, bullpen guys are the easiest. I mean, we all know they're the easiest to replace because there's plenty of 95 to 100 mile an hour arms out there, and that seems to be all you need these days. And you just find a guy who's a little scattergun and get him under control, and then you've got yourself a middle reliever. So I don't worry about Jimmy Garcia or any of those guys. It's just that at the end of the game, Chad Green can only pitch in so many games. And you bring up some of these minor leaguers, AAA and AA, and like you said, they don't have a lot of inventory ready for prime time.
No, it's they've whiffed on too many draft choices. They've just whiffed on too many draft choices, and other guys get hurt. Well, okay, everybody's got kids they love in the minors who are hurt. Tommy John surgery is, they're as common as boob jobs now.
In fact, you look at rosters, and people go, "Oh, woe are the Jays because they've got these guys on the IL." You look through the 30 rosters, and there's teams with 12, 14 guys. There's teams with 3 regular starters on the IL, and so you can't use that as an excuse because it's part of the modern game.
Houston's got a whole rotation on the DL.
Yeah.
It stretches all the way around. Everybody's, like, look at Boston. Everybody said, "Oh, Boston, they're no good this year." Blah blah blah. They lose their starting shortstop, who's a pretty good shortstop, the first weekend of the season. He's out for the year, right? And now they're miles ahead of the Blue Jays. They're contending for a wild card team, like with all their injuries and all their pitchers named Joe that you never heard of. Like other teams can do it.
So let's look at the president and the GM, Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins. And to me, and I talked about this with Kevin Malone, who was the 94 Expos GM, and then he went to the Orioles with Pat Gillick, and then he ended up going to the Dodgers, where he struggled, even though he had an unlimited budget compared to the 94 Expos. And I suggested to him that it's not as easy as it looks going from a small budget team where you have to be careful of every move into a large market team. And is that comparable to going from Cleveland to the current Blue Jays, who were top 10 in payroll?
Sure. Oh yeah, I think they're like number 6 in payroll. Yeah, I wonder about Shapiro. Has he ever considered this a big market? You know what I mean? Like, I really wonder that. Like, I know he was hamstrung in Cleveland. They never won anything in Cleveland either. But when he took over this team, it was the World Series betting favorite, right? Gambling wasn't as prevalent then as now.
Well, they were in 2013 and then again in 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
This was the World Series betting favorite. And you know what I mean? Like what's been his accomplishment? His greatest accomplishment, I guess, now was cup holders. Right? You know what I mean? Like everybody's okay. They rebuilt the Sky Dome into or whatever, Rogers Center into this Taj Mahal of baseball, the Taj Mahal of expensive beers. Well, that's about it. You know what I mean? It's still the same place. Yeah. And here's another thing. You know, we were talking about going to Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. Pittsburgh, you walk over the Clemente Bridge. There's a great big statue of Roberto Clemente. You know what I mean? And down the 50 yards down, there's another big statue of Willie Stargell. And you go to Cincinnati, and there's all the guys. There's Rose and Bench and Morgan and all the stars. And you come here, and there's a statue of Ted Rogers.
Yeah,
like that's it. That's outside the stadium. Ted Rogers.
It's a place for the pigeons to catch their breath.
Yeah, like wow, that's kind of a difference to me. But what do I know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not. I've never been that impressed with Shapiro. He seems,
yeah.
You know, he hides. He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't take questions.
I think I think they don't understand the Canadian fan base and the
absolutely
his fan base, and that they want excitement. They want offense. They want, like, to me, Shapiro and Atkins are like the Amish of front offices minus the good furniture.
Yeah, I mean, they're in love. The numbers
out of it, you know.
The numbers thing drives me crazy. I think people want to see a team that plays the game. Yeah, and by that I mean play the game. Don't just sit back and base everything on numbers and pull pitchers with shutouts in playoff games because some guy at a computer says to. Watch the game. Bunt, hit and run, hit behind the runners, keep the double play in order, throw it to the right base, play the game. Anytime somebody bunts against the Blue Jays, the ball's even money to end up down the right field line. You know that. They can't, you know what I mean?
Like, it doesn't happen often because that makes it a real surprise when it does. But
exactly,
you know, spring training might be the last time they practice bunt defense. So,
well, anything, but I'm just saying, play the game. Yeah, like nobody, and this isn't just the Blue Jays. I'm an old guy. It's across baseball. The teams just don't play the game. They're waiting for the home run.
Well,
wait for the home run.
The other thing I've noticed, and tell me if you agree with it, is that Major League Baseball seems to be now feeling like to compete with the other sports, the NBA, the NFL, where you can go right from college to the big leagues, is that they're willing to live with young mistakes. And now you're seeing more young guys enter the game, and you go,
sure.
What a mistake that was. But the guy's very talented, and he's going to learn. Hopefully he's going to learn.
Well, I don't know. I don't think anybody learns anything. Because you see the same mistakes. Like base running is just god awful everywhere. It's just god awful. And you see the same guys making the same mistakes endlessly. You know what I mean? Like you see Vladdy get picked off to shoot the playoff game behind the year. He's getting picked off this year too. You know, Bichette gets picked up.
One of the Blue Jay mistakes is that they see other teams with that little pity-pat running lead at first base when you're stealing a base. And the Jays' timing is such, and Bo is guilty of it a couple of times in Varsho, is that they take those pity steps and then get picked off behind them by somebody signaling to the pitcher it's time to throw over, and they do, and he's out, and it doesn't count as a caught stealing, so their stolen base percentage still is
whatever.
Good.
But I mean, outs on the bases, like the famous, I think it was the famous 1990 Blue Jays when I was the beat guy and I was keeping track of everything. They made 100 outs on the bases. Like it was phenomenal. It was the worst base running team in history.
I think when I got here, or when I got to the Star, you were pointing out young Tony Fernandez as one of the big culprits.
Yeah, it was, this was an awful base running team, just terrible. They'd give up so many outs. They played run till you're out baseball. And you see so much of this across Major League Baseball now. It's the base running is gruesome, just gruesome.
So we talked about, and you mentioned earlier that you wouldn't mind if they look for deals for Bo and Vlad.
Yeah, I'm fine with anything.
Yeah, my problem with that is that any winning organization franchise usually has one or two cornerstones from their own organization. And to me, Vlad has to be that guy. Bo, I thought, could be included, but no longer do I feel that. I feel like he's got one foot out the door.
Yeah.
But to me, Vlad needs to stay because there's nobody coming up from the organization that you could sort of hang your hat on as our guy. And to me, that means it's going to be very difficult, even to engender fan loyalty and sort of enthusiasm for a team with a bunch of mercenaries, you know?
Well, maybe you're right. Like I say, I'm fine with taking it down to the wood. I've seen bad teams over the years. You know what I mean?
Cup will remain empty if you do that.
I get it, but they're going to be empty anyway once this team is no longer cool, right? Which they're not now. I mean, you got people in the stands chanting "Fire Atkins" now, which is, and I feel bad for Ross because I don't think, you know what I mean? Like I'm an Atkins fan, I guess I would say, because Atkins has made a ton of good moves. You know, getting Teoscar the first time was a good move. You know, he gave up nothing for him. He's landed all kinds of guys. He got Chapman for nothing. He got Berrios for Simeon Woods Richardson. You know, and Berrios is a real good, effective starter. Yeah. And let's not kid ourselves, at $20 million a year, that's not exorbitant anymore. You know what I mean? Like he picked off the year they were in the late pennant race. He got Taiwan Walker for nothing. And you know, I think he got Robbie Ray for next to nothing. Yeah. Like he's made a ton of good moves.
Yeah.
It's just that all anybody wants to talk about is Teoscar leaving. And where did Teoscar go? He went to Seattle for a reliever that they needed last year big time to make the postseason. Right. They don't make it with it, right? And what did Seattle do? They batted Teoscar 7th. He led the league in strikeouts, and they didn't even tender last winter. And he's gone again as a free agent. But, you know, it's easy to, you know, play the hand when the cards are face up. But who was going to give Teoscar $200 million 2 winters ago, or last winter?
Well, you go from last offseason, you go from that one huge contract for Shohei Ohtani, and then as spring training approaches, all the free agents with the super intelligent agents like Scott Boras, all his free agents are signing 3-year deals with opt-out free agency. Correct. So, like, where is that going to land? And I think that might be a factor in not re-upping Vlad to a multi-year, is that they don't know where it's going, you know?
Right.
And until that settles itself, and it's not going to settle itself in Toronto, it's going to settle itself somewhere else, New York, LA.
Exactly.
So they're waiting for that, and they still have Vlad for another year. So I haven't given up on the Blue Jays eventually re-upping Vlad for, I mean, he's only 25 years old. Like, he's got twice as many home runs at 25 career as Aaron Judge had at 25 career. I mean, that's, you know, that's one way of looking at it, but
so you have to give him Judge money.
Judge, yeah.
So you have to give him Judge money if you're going to keep him, because somebody will. You know how it works. I mean, somebody's going to pay him. I mean, nobody would pay Teoscar this year, by the way, but you know, the Dodgers got him on a 1-year deal. You know, so, I mean,
there's a guy who might be because I think he's early 30s, maybe 32. There's a guy who might be a 3-year contract type guy.
Well, for somebody, but he wasn't this year, and he's a year younger this year than he'll be next winter. So
there's a lot of guys who made mistakes in free agency, figuring they would hit the jackpot and never did. So we'll see.
Like the last guy who left here and made it was Simeon, right? Yeah, Simeon hit the jackpot coming out of here, but his one great year here.
Yeah, I mean, That was a
We'd
great
like to
move.
have kept him.
I
Yeah.
will move to second base for you guys,
Yeah.
and I will hit 40 some home runs, and I
Yeah.
will hit it big. And God bless you and thank you.
Yeah.
So
And he was never, there was no subterfuge there. Everybody knew what he was up to.
yeah. So 2016 to 2024. How would you summarize the 9 years in totality of Shapiro and Atkins, given that in 2019 they lost in the 95 games, the rookie year for Bo and Vlad, and then they started to claim victory with the farm system in 2021 and made the playoffs in 3 out of 4 years,
Yeah.
but didn't win a game.
Right. Exactly. It's like Maple Leafs 2.0. You know what I mean? Like you go back to the Shanahan shows up and they immediately tank and finish last with the highest prices in the league. It's a tank job. They get Matthews, who of course is the greatest playoff flop in history. Like Alo Guerrero, his lifetime 138 batting average in the postseason might be give him a run for his money someday, not this year. But I mean, they're like Maple Leafs 2.0.
I think I have a tendency to forgive star players who in the postseason don't post the glitzy numbers because of the fact that you're facing the best pitching every day, and they're focusing on you because you're the star player. I remember Jose Canseco was 0 for 3 years in the postseason. So there's a little bit of that, but yeah, the fact of not winning. They can go from the front office with decisions like replacing Barrios when they also needed to win the next day and wouldn't have had Kikuchi available. They take him out and whatever. But
forget it. Yeah, it's just it was such a harebrained move. It's so stupid. But I get it. Vladdy's only played 6 postseason games and he's stunk in all of them. Blah blah blah. It's a small sample size, which people only say when the numbers don't support their position, right? Yeah. Nobody ever says, because Marino hit 4 home runs in the postseason, nobody ever says it's a small sample size then, do they? They say, what a great postseason guy. He hit 4 home. Like, it's only a small sample size when you want it to be. I get that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's the beauty of sports.
Sure, exactly. But when you mentioned, can I make a left turn here? Yeah. When you mentioned Jose Canseco, think back to your career in the newspaper business, thanks to me, of course. Think of your all your years in the newspaper business and the best line somebody ever gave you in an interview or whatever, or off the record or something. And mine, I would have to say, I mean, I heard a million great ones, but I would have to say my best one concerns Jose Canseco. When I'll say the GM of the Oakland A's at the time, we were talking one day, and Canseco had just been photographed by some New York paparazzi leaving Madonna's apartment. Remember that one?
Yes.
Remember when Canseco was leaving Madonna's apartment? And so we're sitting around yakking with the Oakland GM, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And somebody said, what do you think about your right fielder last night or 2 nights ago, whatever? And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, photograph, he's all over page 6 leaving Madonna's apartment. And he goes like this. He says, well, I think Esther Canseco is going to be about the 8th highest paid player in baseball. Right? Canseco's wife, who we was scrapping with at the time, is going to be the 8th highest paid player. That's a good line. And then, of course, you can't write that. Okay. I mean, God bless Lou Piniella. I mean, you love Lou, right? Lou was one of those old-time guys, right? One night, 1980s, we're in New York, and the Yankees had got Butch Weiniger catching, and Butch wasn't too spry back there. And they had a screwball or a sinker ball slider guy named Cecilio Guante.
Oh, yes.
Who used to throw 57-foot sliders.
Yeah.
So Galante comes and Butch is catching, and he starts throwing them in the dirt, and they're going by Butch on both sides. And Butch is trotting back to the screen. This is the old Yankee Stadium. Butch is trotting back to the screen, and another Blue Jay moves up 90 feet. So the game ends, and Blue Jays win, and we pile into Pinella's office, and somebody says, eventually, but the third question, somebody says, Lou, all those pitches to the backstop, what the? And Pinella says, well, boys, he says, you can't write this, but it looks like they bet the game. Which is a pretty good line. Like, this was long ago in the day.
These days it wouldn't be
so funny. Man,
right?
It'd be out on social media 4 seconds later. Somebody would pop it, it's just, but I mean, there's the difference between covering the game now and then.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't even hear the joke now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
you
nobody
don't
would
know
dare.
everybody in the room. Back then you knew everybody in the room, and
exactly.
So it was more of a trusting environment. I got one more question before we wrap this up is
all right.
The forgotten man with the Blue Jays, signed in the offseason, late in the offseason, homered in Clearwater, stepped on a bat, sprained his ankle, and hasn't been in a game since. Joey Votto, borderline Hall of Famer. I don't think I would vote him in, except he's Canadian. But he's now in Buffalo, and his first game back, he tweaked his ankle again. Before he even got in the game. What do you think? Do you think we'll see him in the majors this year?
Well, I mean, I think you got to be careful. Like, they're hiring him because why? Because he's Canadian. He's from Toronto, and he's a popular guy, and he's funny, and he's on social media, and it gives people somebody to talk about other than the last place team. That's why you're going to hire him, right? Not because, I mean, they just had a left-handed DH you couldn't hit, Vogelberg or Vogelback, right? They rinsed him. You got Turner's a 39-year-old DH, and he's hitting 225, and they're hoping to unload him, right, somewhere. So you're going to bring in a 41-year-old Votto because why? Because he was great for a bunch of years somewhere else. Remember the first rule: never hire anybody you can't fire. If you bring him in and the fans like him, even if he hits 190, and the fans like him and he's funny on social media, how do you get rid of him?
Well, yeah. I mean, I agree with that if there was somebody pushing from behind, from underneath. But like, there's plenty of room on that 26-man roster, soon to be expanded in September. But the bottom line of deciding you're not going to play him anymore, that might be the same as deciding to release him. So having him go on social media and say he should be playing and what's up with this team and that sort of stuff might be counterproductive.
Well, I mean, the old newspaper guy in me wants him around, same as you want him around, because he's funny. He'll give you stories. He'll say stuff that so you can avoid writing about the terrible stuff you see in the field. I get that. I get all that. But and if you want to bring him up for 60 games and then shake hands with him at the end of the season, that's fine. I don't care. I got nothing against Joey Votto. God bless him. I probably would have voted for him if I still had my vote. It would be, he's one of those tweeners I'd look long and hard at. But,
and the thing about the Hall of Fame is I just don't get fans being so destructive about guys that get in the Hall of Fame. Like, who is it hurting when somebody gets in and you go, he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer, just congratulate him and go visit the hall. Check out the Hall of Statues or whatever and move on. But it's bent out of shape with your ballot, especially when in this era of transparency with writers' ballots, which I agree with.
Sure, I'm fine. I was happy to publicize my ballot every year.
Some of the vitriol from fans.
Well, everybody hates everything. You know how it is. And everybody's bottom line is, if you don't agree with me, you shouldn't be allowed to vote.
Yeah.
But how are you going to agree with 3 million different people who would have 3 million different ballots? You can't agree with everybody.
when somebody votes for the Green Party, we don't all jump on him, like even though we know he's not going to win.
Well, yeah, there you go. But I mean, it's like, you want to do a courtesy vote for a guy so we don't get
Yeah.
shut out.
Yeah,
I never really
I've
did
done that
that.
a couple of times.
I never really did that, but because I always felt I had to.
I did that with
justify.
Mark Burley, even though I knew.
Yeah,
And he survived a couple of, like, there were a lot
yeah.
of.
You could
He was such a good
justify
guy,
and make a small case for Mark Burley. I get that. It isn't just a, you know what I mean. I one time, and I love the guy. I like Stottlemyre was crazy. Todd Stottlemyre was a lot of fun. I got along great with him, everything, but I couldn't justify giving him a hello vote. You know what I mean? Like, because I'd have had to, anybody I voted for, I would make a case for in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
that's the way I felt. But I'm different. So
all right. Different. Well, I appreciate you stepping in here, David, and we will have Scotty Mac back from his whale watching next year. This has been episode 29, and if you want the rest of my stuff, Exit Philosophy is on griffthepitch.com, as well as all the columns and power rankings and everything else that I've done over the last couple of seasons since leaving the Blue Jays. And I appreciate it, Dave. Thank you very much for joining me, and it was a great discussion.
Always happy to help.